Hey, welcome to training for this season's Beaver Stream BRAT survey orientation with the Crooked River Watershed Council on Western Beavers. Thanks for joining us, and we look forward to getting out in the field with you. This orientation will give you an idea of what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how we'll be doing it in preparation for meeting with you out for a field day, and then also a little bit more training on April 17th. So that's a Thursday over at the Crooked River Watershed. So let's jump into our training agenda, or kind of our orientation agenda. We'll take a look at key dates, key contexts, kind of why we're doing this, and then a little bit of an overview too of our data collection around the types of data we'll be collecting and things to look for out in the field. I'll look at just logistics a little bit in terms of how you work with Melissa, with the Watershed Council, kind of on coordinating our schedules, and with myself, Reese Mercer, with Western Beavers Cooperative, and then also just what to expect for our field training date. So a couple key dates to remember is this April 17th. On Thursday, we're going to be meeting in the Forage Clover Club. It is across the street from the Watershed Council building on Lynn Avenue, and you'll get that address from us in an email. And if you'd like to carpool from Bend, I think a few of folks will be coming from Bend, let us know, and we'll get you connected, and you can carpool over that day for that training. And then the survey season is going to be about 10 weeks between May 12th to July 31st. And hopefully on our field training date on the 17th, we can pair people up in crews where you have maybe compatible schedules or compatible complementary skill sets and field experience that you can all get out in the field together. Key contacts throughout the entire period will be largely Melissa Stanek. She's with the Watershed Council, and myself. And if you have questions or need to move your schedule around, reach out to one of us at the email address that we've provided. I'll provide it at the end of this training. And then I have this spring survey. This is a screenshot of Loam, where we're going to be organizing all of our key dates. So please be sure to take a look at that. In fact, let me just jump over right now and show you how easy it is to use to go in and just sign up for you could sign your name here if you haven't done this already. This is where we're going to manage all of our field dates, and it's really important that we're coordinating with you on what days you're actually going to be able to be out in the field, because we've got to get in touch with landowners and just coordinate on a lot of pieces. So please take a look at the Loam and make sure that you get signed up, be out in the field for those days. And again, we can tighten things up on the 17th training. So let's jump into the what and the why of beavers. If you've seen us before, go ahead and advance, but want to give an orientation if you're not familiar with the effect that beavers have had on the landscape. They have really profoundly shaped the land over the last 7 million years, taking V-shaped stream valley bottom floors through their activities, turning them into really or U-shaped wide valley floors with rich soil and organic matter and a lot of groundwater charging. So they really, in many cases, have built the wetlands and the waterways of our Eastern Oregon landscapes. And in fact, 200 years ago, before Hudson's Bay Company moved in, we had a whole network of meadows throughout the entire state of Oregon. So just gives you an idea, perhaps, of their coverage throughout the state, and then also what they might have looked like with their damming activities in Watershed. It might have looked something like this. This is a beaver complex over in the Ochicos, and is one of the best examples in Eastern Oregon of beavers where they're really successful. Most of our streams don't look like this, though. And there's a great article called Ruining the Rivers in Snake Country from 20 years ago that talks about how beavers were extirpated from the Hudson's Bay Company. And one of these expressions I think is really important to think about is that when you remove beavers from the land, it can really have profound effects. These extracted elements really help to define a region almost as much as what's in place. So here's an example of that. 200 years ago, before Hudson's Bay Company showed up, beavers were abundant, and the big, wide valley bottom floors, there was water everywhere, and we have multi-branching, anti-branching streams in most of our areas. But then when beavers removed and weren't maintaining their dams, over time, the stream power increased and erosion included. So a lot of what we had 200 years ago, just over the time in the last 2 centuries, really became degraded. And it's been hard to get these systems repaired just with the absence of beavers. So one of the things we'll be doing with the BRAT surveys is looking at watershed scale, where beavers are right now, where we might be able to get them back in and be able to support them on the land so that we can improve what's incised and degraded and try to get more beavers back on the landscape. This is a really good article that talks about the unraveling of the land as beavers disappeared from the landscape. Here's just another example, again, kind of looking at their disappearance from the land. So a lot of our streams right now, especially out in the Crooked River watershed area, where it's very dry, we have very low precipitation. A lot of our streams look like this. They're heavily gullified. The water is disconnected from the floodplain, and some of them are still grazed pretty hard, as this one is in this example. The vegetation here is really dominant with rabbit brush and sagebrush. You won't see a lot of riparian willows or aspen or cottonwoods in here, just because the water just is not staying on the land long enough and not wetting the sponge enough as it needs to. So in an effort to attract beavers and get them back on the land, there's a lot of work going on by ODFW and Utah State University. A lot of people are realizing the value of having them back on the land. So in the Crooked River watershed, in this regard, we've got a really big area this spring that we're looking to cover. This is an example of the different areas that we'll be surveying. Each of these blue dots represents a reach of 300 meters that we'll be surveying in our small crews. And our goal is to survey about 40% of these reaches that are identified here. And let's do a quick close-in of an area of these reaches, just so you can see kind of how we're thinking about using this data to be able to identify where is there beaver activity, and where there is beaver activity, how robust is it, and where are they actually thriving and persistent and having kits and progeny, and where there's enough forage coverage that we should start thinking about supporting those beavers in the long term through vegetation planting or BDAs or beaver-based restoration efforts. So this is sort of a series of examples that will show you kind of building that habitat connectivity is where we ultimately plan to go with all of this information that we're gathering. So where do we start on all of this? That's where you come in. And there is an initiative at a statewide level to look at these watersheds more closely in terms of their ability to support beaver. And the Crooked River watershed is here. So we're part of this broader initiative. And we've been working on this since last year. We had 115 stream reaches that we surveyed last year. And we really need to continue taking inventory of the watersheds. So that watershed, which is really where you come in. The first piece is understanding what's the geomorphology and the shape of the watershed and the hydrology in there. What's the ability of the land and the water to actually support beaver activities? So that's stream power, that's land shape, land formations, it's the valley bottom extent, the width of valley bottom extent, and any kind of erosion that is already in place is going to accelerate stream power. Steep gradients are going to accelerate stream power and make it harder for beaver dams to stay in place. So we'll be looking at that, and then also the potential for infrastructure conflicts, say with culverts or roads, that kind of thing, and also the availability of optimal dam building material like large woody debris, cottonwood, aspens, that kind of thing, and willows to some extent. So this is sort of the first layer of things that we'll be looking at this spring out in the field using what's called the Beaver Restoration Assessment Tool that's developed through Utah State University. And we'll be using that on devices, handheld devices that will be supplied by the Watershed Council and have Survey 123 loaded onto them using this BRAT protocol. Also in the BRAT protocol is a new protocol we've been developing to assess the quality of any existing beaver activity that we see on the landscape. So we're not just saying like, oh yeah, there's beavers in here, but we're saying like they're in here and they mean to stay. And so that's something that we are working to identify using this Beaver Strongholds assessment protocol that will also be built into the Survey 123 form that we'll be using out in the field. And then last, we need to identify as well, is there actually food availability for beavers out on the landscape? So we'll be looking at existing forage availability of their preferred foods. So those are the three really important buckets of information that we want to gather out on the land. Let's take a closer look at the capacity of riverscapes to support dam building using this BRAT model. There's a published paper in 2015 that talks about this further, but basically we are looking at what's the availability of water, woody building materials, and also can beavers build at a base flow? So high river systems, they're probably not going to build, at least on the main stem. And we want to be able to ascertain that and assess that. We also want to know if there are dams in there, are the flows going to get so high that they can still, that the dams can still persist in there. So these are the 5 areas that we'll be looking at through that Beaver Restoration Assessment Tool. We'll also be looking at to what extent, when we do see beaver activity, are these thriving family units that are going to be long-term, have long-term progeny and dispersers that move into the watershed that we might want to consider helping to build connectivity around. And what is the ability of the stream sites that we're going to survey? What is the ability of that site to actually support long-term occupancy of existing thriving beaver family units? Because ultimately that's what we want. We want happy, thriving beaver family units for any of this to make sense. So the process of data collection is that our goal is to survey 200 reaches, primarily moving east of Prineville in these 3 or maybe even 4 areas here. So some of these distances, this is the Maori Mountains, this is the Ochakos up here. Some of these distances we'll be traveling could be as far as about an hour and a half to 2 hours away from Prineville. So we may have some overnights going out and getting this information, but they will be pretty long days as we have a fair bit of drive time to happen. And sometimes between these reaches, there's also more drive time. So just be prepared to do some car time and then also get out in the field. Our goal will be about 3 to 5 reaches per crew per day is sort of our goal overall. And yeah, this is our focus area that we'll be working on. So here's that Beaver Restoration Assessment Tool. This is just sort of the output. You can see what it gives us is an idea of the ability of that landscape to support a lot of dam building or little dam building or no dam building at all. And again, we'll talk about what the inputs are on that. It will be evident too on the survey form, but that's ultimately what we're trying to understand is can beavers build dams here? And if they can build dams, are these dams likely to persist on the landscape? And how successful can we be with all of that? What this tool doesn't provide is an assessment of the abundance or availability of forage. And so that's those other 2 layers that we'll be talking about. It also doesn't provide, this is kind of out of the box, it doesn't provide an idea of what their existing occupancy intention is. So that's where we've added these other layers that will come in. So the second layer is the quality and occupancy of existing beaver occupancy. I'm going to go into some detail here, but there are 6 key activities that will be focused on, either dens or lodges. Also, how much foraging are they actually doing? Are they building a food cache? That's something they do when they plan to stay at a site for a long time. So we'll want to know, does it look like they're getting ready to store food, either for the winter, or sometimes I'll do it in the spring or the summer, but usually it's a wintertime activity or pre-winter activity. We also want to know if they are building scent mounds, which sometimes we'll see out on our landscapes, and they don't provide, they're not always easy to see, but they do provide a lot of information to us about that riverscape, those scent mounds, if we happen to see them and make an observation around that. And then feeding benches, we'll look at that as well, and the quality. So what you can see over here is we're looking at, is that activity actually visible? And if it is, we want to measure an idea of whether it's a little bit of activity or a lot of activity, if the dens are large, if they're small, that kind of thing. So we'll go into a little bit more detail on that here in a minute. This is just a screenshot of what the form looks like in Survey 123. So we'll take a look at these activities right now. So here's an example of a den site. This is the same den site, just 2 different angles. It's a pretty well-established den site, pretty large and easy to see. They won't always be that easy to see, but I just want you to see an example of what one of the den sites might look like. And this is from a similar location. This is a separate den, and this is sort of a medium-sized den. This is between, I think it's the 10 to 15 foot range. You can see from the river when you look at the stream side to the outside laterally, it's about 12 feet at the base over here. And this is this den's been here for a couple of years. It's pretty well established. There's probably a small beaver family living in there, versus to contrast that with this brand new den site, which is quite small, and it's just not really built up yet because there just hasn't been a need. It's probably a buck beaver in there. It's not a very big family yet, and so that will be a smaller den. So that's one thing that we'll be logging in our work. We'll also be logging dams, and this is just an example of 3 dams back to back. There's that den that, actually, this is a totally separate den in that same complex, but there's a lot of beaver dens in there. But these dams, you'll see, are made of sticks and then also of rocks as well. That was one of the main materials they were using in there. But we're going to want to log every single dam that we see in the reach that we'll be surveying. Here's an example of more dams, and also when we take photos for our data collection, we're looking to take the photos from river right. So as the water's flowing downstream, as you're riding in a kayak downstream, think of the right side of the river. That's called river right. We'll want to be on that side of the river to capture our photos as we go out in the field, and we're going to try and position ourselves about 10 feet downstream of the dam site in order to get the photo. Here's just another example. Again, different dam. This one's had some cattle grazing on top of that. So this used to be a big, beautiful dam, and it's kind of gotten eroded over time. The beavers have not come back in to maintain it. Here's another dam as well. So just to give you a variety of the types of photos that we're trying to look for with our dam sites. We will also be asking on the data collection sheet if the dams have been maintained recently. And this is a good illustration or a good example, 2 different examples. You'll see mud in here where they're doing dam maintenance. And then you'll also usually see either bright sticks because they've been debarked or grasses floating up along there. So these are two really good examples of dams that are being actively maintained by the beavers that live there. And then this is just an example of a dam site that was built during the late season. This is actually the Crooked River. It's flowing at 6,000 CFS right now. In this photo, it's probably flowing at about 15 CFS right now. So you can see there's a lot of variability that beavers need to learn to adapt to in these systems. And this photo was from, I think it was about August of last year, when they were able to build that dam and pool up some water. My guess is that dam is probably gone by now. So that's a lot of effort that gets lost during our high flows. Foraging and vegetation and feeding, that's another element that we'll be looking at. It's our third element that we'll be looking at, I think, or maybe our second on the device. So we want to know, is there a lot of forage activity, fresh current forage activity, or is it more recent forage activity? This is an example of a lot of forage activity. You can see it's fresh because the shavings are very bright, the cuts are very bright, and there's just a lot of things happening. There is probably a bigger, larger beaver family there occupying that site, and they've got plenty of food in this area. So they're going to be in there for a while. They'll probably be having kits, and they'll probably be a population source versus a population sink over time. Another example is cattail and aquatic veg. Oftentimes, this is a large family in here doing a lot of work. In this case, they are actually eating cattail and using it for dam building, which is somewhat unusual. But in this case, these beavers have been able to adapt and make use of the cattail as both forage and dam building material. And then sedges and grasses in the summertime, when we're going out, we will probably see a fair bit of activity like this, where we've got just sedges and grasses floating on top of the ponds. You will also, in the areas where there's not a lot of vegetation, you will see beaver activity on juniper. And we'll look for some of those signs when we go out in the field on Thursday. But juniper can be a kind of a secondary or a tertiary food source for them. It also, by chewing on junipers, it helps to do dental maintenance, if you will, dental care, because their incisors are growing all the time. So sometimes they need to chew on these hard trees to help do basic dental hygiene. And one telltale sign, and this is important, I look for this all the time, of whether or not there are beavers there, and you can even see it on the cattail, is this 45-degree angle of chew. So these marks here, you can see how the beaver has to chew on the tree. They tilt their head, and you'll always 45-degree angle on whether it's a cattail or a sedge or a tree or a stick. You'll be able to know pretty clearly that is beaver activity. This is a scent mound, which I talked about earlier. These are pretty big scent mounds. What you'll look for is a mass of mud and sticks usually. There might be oils on top because they secrete. It looks like in this example, there might be some oils on there. They secrete their castoreum on top of the scent mound in order to let other beavers who might be coming through know that this is their territory and they've staked that out, and to let any other beavers in the system know that this location is claimed. Again, Eastern Oregon, we don't have a lot of beavers, so we won't see these very often, but if we do, we definitely want to make a note of it because that signals that there might be other beavers in the whole system. And then food caches, I mentioned earlier, these are more typical in the wintertime, as beavers basically park a whole bunch of groceries in the freezer or the refrigerator for the upcoming winter season. They can usually access this from down below. If the stream or the pond freezes over, they can get access to that food. So that's a really big indication that they plan on staying for a while at that location. Here's another example over on the right where that lodge, you can see just outside of that, beavers have been building up their food cache out there so they can access that if the snow and the ice covers over the pond during the wintertime. So that's another thing we'll be looking at also. And I think this is our final of our 6 key things that we'll be looking for out in the field is, can you identify feeding benches? So that will be an area that is streamside. It's just between the stream itself and land. And they spend a lot of time there when they are foraging, when they're eating their food, or when they're grooming. So here's some couple different examples where you can see the vegetation is flattened down, it's deadened sometime, and there's a lot of sticks nearby. That means that's a favorite area where they've been hanging out and feeding, and they'll spend many hours there every night. So that's kind of a dead giveaway that you've got some pretty active beaver activity. The more benches you have in there, the more activity, probably the bigger family. Here's another example. And then another example, and you can see these bright sticks are just all debarked from where they've been foraging. This is another example of another site, smaller sticks over here. But yeah, that's kind of their hangout place where they do all their work. And here's an example of that. This is a juvenile beaver, a subadult, and a kit from the same year. And they basically just pull up out of the water. And if they have a willow branch with them, they'll start chomping on that, or maybe they want to sit there and do a grooming session for the next 30 minutes. But that's sort of a big indicator of beavers on the landscape. And when we see more of those, we know that there's probably more beavers in there. So the third layer that we're looking at with our data collection is how much food availability is there. You're going to see vegetation in a few different ways, but which is this streamside vegetation suitability for dam building materials, but beavers also. So we'll have that, and I'm not going to go into detail on that right now. But what I do want to talk about is forage availability and coverage. So how much food is there actually within the system for beavers to make use of? And we'll just simply score it as low, medium, or high food availability. We are only looking for their preferred foods, which are usually in our area willow, cottonwood, aspen, or on occasion cattail, which is aquatic vegetation. So we want to identify for the stream reach that we're surveying what is the coverage of that area. We're looking at a 30 meters away from the stream side. This is kind of the safe zone for beavers to travel. And so they like to do all of their foraging activities about 30 feet away, river right and river left of the stream, safety. So that's about how far they can run and escape a predator before they where they can do that safely. Once they start getting out beyond 30 meters, it's harder for them to escape a predator by retreating back to the creek. So we'll be capturing that. Here's a couple examples or a few examples of what this would look like. This is over on the South Fork Crooked River. You can see there is almost zero. In fact, there is zero willow, cotton, or aspen on this system. These are all cottonwood, these are all juniper trees off in the distance. You can see this example, there's a little bit more willow coverage. So this is kind of a ribbon or a beauty strip of willows in here, anywhere from 1 to 3 willows deep off the stream side. So that's what this picture depicts. And then the third example is this is a long-term beaver complex, and there's willows everywhere. This is not exactly the right example, but there's an example of this. About 70% of the area that they're occupying is covered in willows. So we know that the beavers in here are going to have a really good long-term food source, and that as they harvest willow, it will be able to regenerate at the same pace of their ability to forage. So this is really what we're going for with these long-term beaver managed floodplains, is a complex like this where they have ample food and forage availability to stay there for the long term in a really thriving and persistent way. Let's talk a little bit about vegetation types, and this is something that you'll want to key in on when we go out in the field together. Willows, these are the beaver favorites on this first slide, the first three. So we've got willows as a favorite. These are what their leaves look like. Aspen as well. We won't see as much of that where we're going. And then also cottonwood is a huge favorite as well. Unfortunately, we won't see much of those in most of the places that we'll be traveling. We will see a fair bit of alder, and alder is a really good dam and den building material, but it is not a preferred favorite food. So alder is sort of a secondary class of vegetation that you'll see out there insofar as the beavers are concerned, but I just wanted to give you an example of what an alder would look like. We also have a few other vegetation types that you'll see a lot of on the landscape. These are not typically riparian vegetation, but in our landscape, it has been riparian vegetation just again because we have our disconnected floodplains. And so we have really dry riparian areas. And so we'll often see juniper dominant, sage dominant, or rabbit brush dominant riparian areas. We'll also see a lot of times reed canary grass, which is an invasive rhizomatous, very large grass that chokes out all of the other good grasses. So I'm not really a fan of reed canary grass. It's not a good food source for beavers and doesn't make really great dam building materials. And the bigger problem is that it outcompetes all of the yummy stuff like willow, aspen, and cottonwood. So reed canary grass we'll definitely see a lot of, unfortunately. We'll also probably see some teasel as well. Less of an issue than the canary grass, but I just wanted to make you aware of other types of vegetation. We'll see. So jumping over to logistics, and we'll be tightening some things up in the coming weeks, but I wanted to just kind of overview for you that for each of our crews at the Crooked River Watershed Council office, you'll go and pick up a go bag that Melissa has created. And these go bags will have a number of items in there for first aid, safety vest. We really want everyone to wear safety vests, paper, and then importantly, a tablet and a charger. So the tablet will have our Survey 123 forms on it. So this is what you'll pick up from the Watershed Council each time before you go out. And then we'll also want you to drop it off before you come back as well. And our survey crews are 6.5 hour shift out in the field, and it will take time to get out to the survey site. So just plan for that, plan accordingly. And then the really important note here is a lot of lands we're going to be surveying are private landowner lands. And I'm going to go into a little bit more detail here, but we need to be really, really conscientious about going on to somebody's private land. A lot of times these are places where they actually have businesses in operation and livestock production, maybe timber production, and we want to be really ultra sensitive to not getting in the way, not leaving gates open, and also making sure that the landowners know when you are expected to arrive and when you will be leaving. If we do anything that comes out of this, we have to be very, very conscientious and mindful of our visits to landowner properties. And I'll talk about that a little bit more here in a minute. So let's see, we'll be looking for, as you crew, we'll be looking for crews of 2. We can go into this in more detail on the 17th and create a buddy system. We don't want people going out by themselves. It's really important. We'll be going out when there are complications with rattlesnakes. Will be out there during the hot times. There's also other critters out there, and just for overall safety and doing better at data collection, we always want you to pair up with at least 2 people, if not more. But 2 seems to be working pretty good for us. And then yes, please be sure once you decide on best survey dates, if you find a crew buddy, to make sure you're signing up on loam and kind of coordinating with Melissa at the Watershed Council. And then if you get all 5 dates in this season, we'll give you a cool sticker. So working on private lands, this is what we've told the participating landowners. This is our commitment to them, is that we are all about just getting on the stream, getting the data we need. Don't get distracted. If you see a cool barn or something cool happening, that's not our business, right? We're just there to do our business of data collection on the stream, get in and get out. And then respecting the livestock it's absolutely essential. And then cleaning your shoes is just good insurance that we're not spreading, invasive grasses or seeds that don't belong on that property. We want to make sure that we leave any seeds on the same property that we came from. So always clean your shoes after each visit at each site before your next visit. All of this for us is trust is job number one. So again, just a little bit more expectations that we have of you, that the landowners have of us, is to just stay within the stream reach, take photos only of the stream channel and the stream bed. Don't take photos of other things that we really aren't there for. And then make sure that we've got all gates closed, we're respecting the livestock, and then we're cleaning our shoes after each visit. So here's an example of a fence that you'll see on some of these smaller backcountry roads that use, and we'll take an example of that in the field on the 17th. But here is a gate post that is, actually, this is a pretty nice example. They're not always this easy to work with, but they'll usually have, this would be the gate, for example, and there'll usually be a wire at the bottom and a wire at the top. And what you can see is this cheater bar can help you get leverage to close the distance between the gate post and the anchor post and be able to lift that wire off the top. So here's a picture of this fella doing this here. So he's getting leverage with that cheater bar, and then he's closing that top wire over that loop there. Again, this looks pretty straightforward. Some of these can be pretty janky. So do your best to get that gate closed. This is where it may take 2 people to help with that. That would not be uncommon. Sometimes these are really tight and a little bit challenging, but keeping those gates closed, finding the gates the way we found them is going to be really important. So that's just an example of how to use one of these backcountry gate posts with a lever bar. And then some things to think about if you're driving along and you encounter this. We want you to just think about really hard about, any stress that gets put on these livestock. This livestock is money. So don't be honking your horn or making a production. Like, it's not worth it. If you miss a reach that day because you got hung up behind some folks moving cows, that's okay. It's not worth it to get to that reach if we're going to create some upset feelings or hard feelings out there and cause stress to the livelihood of the folks who are living out on this landscape. So you may run into this. Usually won't last for long. Usually takes about 10 or 15 minutes for things to clear, and just clear off of the side of the road and be polite and just be patient. Know that we don't need to rush any of this. If you arrive at a gate and there's livestock where you need to enter, if you're comfortable with it, you can just slowly move in there and push that gate open. The livestock will move off to the side. If there's at any point it looks like they might escape when you're doing this, again, not worth it. And we'll just come back and get that reach and just mark it in the notes and let Melissa know that you weren't able to get to that reach. But just not worth it to get a reach at the cost of upsetting the operations going on out there with our landowner cooperators. So before you head out, I recommend every time before you head out, make time to sit down, download your field maps. You are not going to have internet in many cases. So it's really important you do all of your organization up front with the field maps, with the Survey 123 form. Be prepared before you go out in the field to make sure you've got all of those technological aspects figured out on the device. On the data collection Survey 123 form, we're going to ask you to get as many photos of you as you can, again, of the stream, right? And then just these essentials. Don't hurry. If you're in doubt, just don't do it. Just remember that trust thing and leave fences as you found them, and don't get distracted by cool stuff. Stay focused on what we're trying to do with the data collection. And this is the last slide here, really just a reminder of the field training. We're going to show up at 9 o'clock at the Forage Clover building. We'll be in there for a couple of hours, just kind of refreshing, reviewing, and getting to know the survey form. And then we'll go out and hit the field. Please bring rubber boots. We might need them. Stream flows are really high right now. And then we're going to drive about a half an hour away from the Clover building. So we'll be in the field for about 4 hours, and we'll come back from the field at about 4 o'clock. So we'll be back in Prineville, I'd say by 4:30 that day of training. And I think that's it for now. We're going to have a whole lot more to throw at you on the 17th, but really super excited by your interest in this project and hope that it is what you hope for. And if you have any questions, of course, ask Melissa or Reese. We've got a few other folks who are supporting this effort too that you may interface with, but really excited to have you out there. And this is going to make a big difference in our understanding of how can we help beavers recolonize this watershed, and just understanding the watershed better and how do we approach the work that we're doing in the watershed. Thanks so much.